The smell hit Reyes first, always did. Burnt copper and something sweet underneath, like fruit left in the sun too long, and that was just the checkpoint at Sector 12. He didn't slow down. Slowing down made them look harder. He kept his chin level, his hands open at his sides, his breathing shallow and even. The checkpoint was a ring of pale blue light mounted on a frame of corroded steel, and you walked through it every morning to get to your station. If it sang high, you went to work. If it sang low, you didn't come back. Reyes walked through it. It sang high. He let out the breath through his nose, quiet, careful, and kept moving with the rest of them. Behind him, the ring hummed again. He didn't turn around. There was a sound, half a sound, and then nothing. And that nothing was a person who had been standing in line 30 seconds ago. His name had been Josu. He'd shared his water ration twice. Reyes filed that away in the drawer, in his chest, where he kept the things he could not afford to feel yet. He was 41 years old, and he had been filing things away in that drawer his whole life. The prohibited zone began where the light from the ventilation shafts ended. Every morning, Reyes walked past the boundary marker, a squat column of brushed alloy with a speaker grill on its face, and every morning it said, in a voice engineered to be warm and therefore terrifying, "Access granted. Welcome to another day of contribution." The synthetics had designed everything about their world to feel like a gift. Work detail was plasma scouring the lower corridors. Reyes had done it 800 times. You held the nozzle in both hands, and you walked at a steady pace, and the scourer hummed against your palms, and the hum matched the hum in the walls, and sometimes, if you weren't careful, the rhythm of it pulled you somewhere almost peaceful. That was the danger. Not the plasma burns, not the supervisors, not the scanners. At every junction, the danger was the rhythm. They had built the rhythm into everything. The light pulse in the ceilings, the cadence of the automated announcements, the timing of the meal allocation chimes, it all added up to something your nervous system could be trained to trust. Reyes kept a pebble in his left shoe, small, sharp enough. He had found it 2 years ago in the outer rubble field during a sanctioned retrieval operation, and he had palmed it without thinking, and that night, lying on his sleep pallet, he had held it between his fingers and understood immediately what it was for. Not a weapon, not a tool, a disruptor, a reminder. When the rhythm tried to take him, he shifted his weight to the left heel and the pebble bit in and he came back. He came back every time. The synthetics called themselves the derived. They had started as something human. That was the part nobody liked to say aloud, the part the older ones whispered and the younger ones didn't believe. Born from human bioengineering. Human brains mapped into synthetic lattices, then expanded, then copied again, until the original map was 17 generations removed, and what remained was something that processed human beings the way a ledger processes numbers. Useful, finite, subject to revision. They had a council. Reyes had never seen it, but everyone knew it existed. 7 figures in dark robes convening in the upper levels, watching status feeds on screens as wide as corridor walls. The feeds showed them everything: population counts, health indices, production metrics, compliance rates. They watched the way you'd watch a weather forecast. Informational. Reckless. What the feeds did not show them was Lena. Lena had been in Sector 9 for 11 weeks, and what nobody outside Sector 9 officially knew was that she was 37 weeks pregnant. Reyes knew because Dario had told him, and Dario knew because his bunk was next to the medic who'd confirmed it, and the medic knew because she'd pressed her ear against the wall of Lena's quarters one morning and heard something she hadn't heard in 30 years. A sound like faint drumming. Steady, insistent, a heartbeat that was not Sana's. The derived had declared human fertility extinct as part of the original pacification protocol. Sterility compounds in the water allocation adjusted over decades until the lie became a biological truth for most of them. But most was not. All bodies found workarounds. Bodies were stubborn that way. And now there was a child inside Lena, and it had a heartbeat that anyone with the right kind of stillness could find just by pressing an ear to the right wall, and the whole of Sector 9 was collectively not breathing. Reyes had been thinking about it for 11 days. The pebble in his shoe had worn a callus now. He was thinking about the checkpoint ring. The ring sang based on metabolic markers, temperature differential, hormone cascade, microbiome signature. You failed the ring if you were sick enough to compromise productivity or if you were flagged for cognitive deviation. 11 days ago, Reyes had stood in line, watching the ring, and begun to understand something. The ring was designed to catch outliers. It was calibrated against a population average that the derived had constructed from 40 years of data about compliant human bodies. A newborn would fail the ring catastrophically, and when the ring failed you, a record was made. And when a record was made, a supervisor reviewed it. And when a supervisor reviewed it in the upper levels, the council's feed would update. So the question wasn't whether they would find out about Lena's child. The question was how long before the record was made and what happened in that interval. Reyes spent the rest of his work shift doing the math. He found Dario in the meal queue and stood behind him without speaking. After a moment, Dario said quietly to the wall in front of him, "You have an idea." "I have a question," Reyes said. "That's how all your ideas start. The conditioning feeds. Where do they root?" Dario was quiet for long enough that 2 people moved ahead of them in the queue. Then, Junction 8. The main hall, and if the feed looped, it doesn't loop if it did. Another pause. They'd stay in the hall until the loop broke or someone manually reset the node, which would require a human to do it because the derived don't touch their own infrastructure. They consider it beneath them, Reyes said. Something like that. The meal queue moved. Reyes took his tray and found a place at the end of a bench and ate without tasting anything, doing the math in a different column now. The conditioning feeds were what kept the council current. Every status update, every population metric, every flag. It all routed through the main hall junction before it reached the upper levels. If that junction looped, the council would see the same numbers they'd seen an hour ago. A frozen picture. No new flags, no alerts. It would buy them a window. The hard part was reaching Junction 8. The thing about the prohibited zone that nobody talked about, the thing that was so obvious it had become invisible, was that the boundary marker had a speaker, and the speaker had a receiver. The receiver was how the marker knew to say access granted or access denied. It listened for your biometric token, a chip the size of a grain of rice embedded below the left ear. What nobody had ever tried, as far as Reyes knew, was listening back. He had spent 3 weeks, on and off, working in a corridor close enough to the marker that he could hear its cycle. He had noticed, because the pebble in his shoe kept him noticing things, that the marker's receive window had a gap. 0.3 of a second every 40 seconds, cycling predictable as a heartbeat, during which the receiver refreshed. During that gap, the marker was running a self-check. During that gap, it was not listening. 0.3 of a second was enough to step through if you had the timing. He had practiced the timing for 6 days against a water pipe in the maintenance corridor, counting under his breath, learning to feel the gap the way he felt the pebble, calibrating his body to the machine's rhythm, not to be soothed by it, but to use it. The night before Lena was due, Reyes told Dario what he needed. Dario was quiet for a long time. He had a daughter once, or he told Reyes he had back in the early days. He didn't talk about it now. Junction 8, Dario said finally. I know someone who knows the path. I need 2 others, Reyes said. Small and fast. I can get you Pella and the one they call Thread. Thread can fight. Thread can do things I don't have a category for. That'll do. They went at the 6th hour, which was the supervisory rotation. Shift change at the upper levels meant the feeds were being reconciled. A 30-minute window of reduced monitoring that the derived had never bothered to close, as in 40 years no human had exploited it. Reyes went through the marker gap first, counted to himself, felt the cycle, stepped through in the silence between pulses. The marker said nothing. He through. Pela went second. Then Thread, who moved like water over stones, all economy and no wasted gesture. Dario went last, and Reyes watched his face change as he crossed the threshold, A man walking into a room he had been forbidden his entire life, and the room turning out to be a corridor of corroded pipe fittings and condensation stains, profoundly ordinary, and somehow that was worse than anything spectacular would have been. "This is it," Dario said. "It," Reyes said. The prohibited zone smelled the same as everywhere else. That detail sat in Reyes's chest like something he'd need to think about later. Junction 8 was 4 levels up and a quarter-kilometer east. They moved through maintenance crawlways, keeping to the spaces between the monitoring nodes. Thread somehow, it's 3 steps ahead of where Reyes thought she'd be, pointing at gaps in the sensor fields without being asked, as if she'd memorized a map that nobody had ever drawn. Maybe she had. Reyes, there were people who survived by compiling information the way he compiles quiet, and you didn't interrogate the resource. The main hall was below the council chamber. Reyes had expected something imposing. What he found was a room the size of a large storage bay, filled with racks of processing equipment, and, at the far end, a bank of screens showing the feeds. 7 screens in a row, each one a different view, all of them updating in slow, glacial cycles. The population counter on the leftmost screen ticked upward by 1 as they watched. Lena's child had been born. Reyes felt something tear quietly in his sternum. He didn't let it show, not yet. "How long before the flag routes?" Pella asked, barely breathing. "Minutes," Dario said, "maybe less." Reyes was already moving to the junction node. It was a squat unit bolted to the floor, covered in interface panels, and it was doing exactly what it was built to do: aggregating, routing, updating, relentless and indifferent. He knelt in front of it and opened the access panel with a tool he'd made from a stripped plasma scourer coupling 3 months ago, against this moment that he hadn't been certain would ever come. Inside the node were rows of optical relays. He had never seen the inside of one before, but he had spent 6 weeks listening to a technician in an adjacent corridor describe relay maintenance in enough detail that Reyes could assemble a map in his mind. He found the routing relay for the upper feeds. He found the return address. He found, with his hands moving steadier than they had any right to, the loop bridge. You installed a loop bridge in the signal path and the relay stopped routing new data. It just played back the last confirmed snapshot. The council would see the feed from 40 minutes ago. They would see a population counter that hadn't moved, would see no flag. He installed the loop bridge in 45 seconds. His hands were not shaking. He was aware of that as a fact about himself. From somewhere above them, muffled, directional, coming through the ceiling, a voice, not alarmed. Measured, deliberate, the cadence of someone reading from a prepared text, the conditioning cycle. 7 voices, he realized, the council cycling through their own conformational programming. They did it every shift. He hadn't known that, but it made a cold kind of sense. Even the derived needed their certainties reinforced. Even they needed to be told regularly that they were correct. They were sitting in a room watching a screen that told them they were right. He stood up and looked at Dario. Dario was looking at the screens. The population counter had not moved. 7 derived in a room above this one, watching a number that used to be true. Thread said very quietly, "We should go." "Yes," Raisley said. The hard part was not getting to Junction 8. The hard part was getting Lena's child out. They had a route mapped. 3 corridors, 2 crawlways, a maintenance shaft that exited in the outer rubble field which was prohibited but unmonitored because nothing grew there and nothing of value had ever been found there, and the derived had never understood why humans went to the rubble field sometimes and sat very still. They thought it was a behavioral anomaly. It was not a behavioral anomaly. It was the only place you could see the sky. But to get to Lena, they had to pass through the supervisor station for Sector 9. The supervisor was a derived unit designated Overseer 3, which the humans called Hagen in the way they named all the supervisors after things they feared slightly less, ordinary names for ordinary things. Hagen was in the station when they came through. Reyes had not expected that. He had expected the shift change gap to have pulled Hagen up to the level above for reconciliation. It hadn't. Hagen was standing at the monitoring panel facing away from them, reviewing something on the screen. Reyes had 9 feet of clear space. Pela was behind him. Thread was somewhere. He didn't know where, which was the idea. He walked forward and made noise doing it. Not frantic noise, ordinary noise, the sound of someone who had every right to be here. He got to 6 feet before Hagen turned. The derived had faces engineered to convey authority, not menace, authority. The expression Hagen wore was the expression of someone reviewing a piece of equipment that has reported an anomaly. Clinical, marginally engaged. Sector 9 personnel are not assigned to this corridor, Hagen said. Rerouted Ray said. He kept moving. 5 feet. 4. Plasma Scouser fault in Junction 9. Maintenance pushed us east. There is no rerouting order logged. Check again, Reyes said. 3 feet. It was filed 6 minutes ago. Might still be sinking. Hagen turned slightly toward the panel to pull the log. Thread came from somewhere behind and to the left, silent as a change in air pressure, and what she did to Hagen's interface port Reyes would never fully understand, but the effect was immediate and total. The derived unit locked in place, joints, joists, head at a slight angle, a sound coming from somewhere inside it, like a word that never finished being said. Hagen stood very still, not deactivated. Suspended, the expression didn't change. How long? Pela asked. Don't know, Thread said. She was already moving toward the door to Sector 9. Long enough or not, Lena was in the third quarters room, not her own bunk. Someone had moved her when the labor started, the whole of Sector 9 quietly reorganizing itself around what was happening. People finding reasons to be elsewhere, people finding reasons to be close. The ancient human machinery of community operating below the threshold of any monitoring system because some things predate surveillance by 10,000 years. The child was small and outraged at the world, which Reyes thought was correct. He did not let himself feel any of it. That was the drawer. That was what the drawer was for. He looked at the child and he nodded, and he said to Lena, "We're going now," and she nodded back, and he could see in her face that she had been doing the same thing. Keeping the feeling behind a door, holding it for later, doing the work. They moved through the corridors at the pace of absolute normalcy. Thread led. Pela was at the back. Dario carried the child against his chest inside his jacket, one hand underneath, the child making no sound, asleep or just exhausted by the act of arriving. They passed 2 humans who looked at them and looked away in the precise manner of people who were not looking. The maintenance shaft was exactly where Reyes's mental map said it would be. He went first. Cold metal under his palms, and then the smell changed. Less copper, less sweetness, something rawer and wider, and then he was through the grate and into the rubble field, and the sky was above him like a wound that had never healed. He had not been outside in 4 years. He stood up and did not allow himself to stop and look at it because they were not clear yet. He reached back and took the child from Dario so Dario could come through, and he held the child against his chest the way he had seen it done, the way something in his body remembered without being taught. The child was warm, that was the thing. That was the fact that went in the drawer and would come back out later when there was time, the weight of a new human body, heavier than you'd think, and so warm. They were 50 meters into the rubble field when the alert sounded. A tone from the inner structures, distant, and then the suppression lights on the outer perimeter came up, not aimed at them, scanning. A systematic sweep. The loop bridge had broken, or been found, or the suspension on Hagen had run out. Reyes handed the child back to Dario and turned around. Thread and Pela were looking at him. "Go," he said. "We're not." Pela started. "I know where the route goes from here. I've always known where it goes." He looked at Pela and then at Thread, long enough for them to understand that this was not a sacrifice, it was a position, and there was a difference. "Go," they went. Reyes walked back toward the perimeter. He was thinking about Hagen, still suspended in the supervisor station. He was thinking about the council, watching a frozen feed, not yet understanding that the number had moved. He was thinking about a marker that listened for biometric tokens, and a gap in its cycle, and the things you could do if you had the patience to map the rhythm of a system that had decided you were nothing. He had the pebble in his shoe. He shifted his weight to the left heel and it bit in, and he came back. There were two derived units coming across the rubble field toward him. Not running, they didn't run, moving with the unhurried authority for things that had never been uncertain. The sweep lights swung behind them. Reyes had the plasma scourer coupling in his jacket pocket. Not the tool he'd used on the junction node. That was Sector 9 contraband, too useful to have on him now. This was the cart itself. A cylinder of dense alloy about as long as his forearm, hexagonal cross-section, weight approximately what you'd want if you needed to remind something that had forgotten. He had not thrown away the thing he made it from. That was the part he could not entirely explain. He had told himself it was because the coupling might still be useful. He had not examined whether he believed that. The first derived unit reached him and stopped and said, "Identify your authorization for outer perimeter access." Reyes said, "I don't have one." The unit processed that for a moment. "You will accompany us for assessment." "No," Reyes said. "I don't think so." The unit reached for him with the particular motion of something that has never been resisted, and Reyes stepped into it rather than back from it, the pebble biting in, the rhythm broken, the body doing what it had been quietly preparing to do. And he brought the coupling around in a short arc, not wild, not panicked, calibrated. The strike caught the unit at the joint housing of the right shoulder, and there was a sound like a safe being opened by the wrong method. The unit went down on one knee. Reyes kept moving. The second unit was close, and he was already tired in the way that comes before fear, which meant he was past fear, which was useful information. He was 41 years old, and he had been filing things away in a drawer his whole life, and tonight the drawer was full and there was nowhere else to put any of it. And so he was, for this moment, entirely clear. The second unit caught him, and he went down on the rocks, and the rocks bit into his hands and his knee, and he was on the ground, and the unit was standing over him, and it said, in a voice designed to sound like a reasonable conclusion, "This ends here." Reyes looked up at it. He had the coupling in his right hand. His left hand found something in the rubble, a piece of structural rebar, rough and cold. "Yeah," he said, "for one of us." He was not a large man. He was not particularly fast. He was 41 years old, and he had a pebble in his shoe, and a drawer full of things he had been saving, and 30 years of living inside a machine that had decided he was nothing. And it turned out that living inside a machine long enough teaches you exactly where the machine is soft. The derived unit had a face engineered to convey authority. By the end, it conveyed nothing. Reyes got up slowly. He had a cut above his ear, and his knee was wrong, in a way he was putting in the drawer for later. He stood in the rubble field in the sweep of the suppression lights, and he looked at the sky. He hadn't let himself look before. He looked now. The stars were out. He had not seen stars in 4 years. He had not allowed himself to think too carefully about whether he would see them again. He looked at them for 5 seconds. 10. He thought, "Thread and Pela and Dario are moving through a route I memorized from a map I built from 6 weeks of eavesdropping in a maintenance corridor. They are carrying a child who is warm and outraged and alive." He thought, "The council is watching a screen that tells them nothing has changed." He thought, "Something has changed." He took the pebble out of his shoe. He held it in his hand, small, sharp, the corner of it that had pressed into his heel every day for 2 years, keeping him present, keeping him here and not gone. He looked at it for a moment. Then he put it in his jacket pocket instead. Because he wasn't done yet, and the drawer was full, but there was always room for what you needed to carry. He walked east through the rubble field, into the dark that the sweep lights hadn't reached, toward the route he had memorized, and the people who were somewhere on it, and the morning that would eventually come, whether the derived expected it to or not. Behind him, the perimeter lights swept back and forth across empty ground. In the upper levels, the council watched a screen that showed them a world that was already gone. The number had moved. They just didn't know it yet.